Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for March 12th, 2018. On today's show, we're going to take a stop at the water cooler and talk about a few things we've been watching and reading, and we'll be talking about a bunch of news in our news segment. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
So, guys, before we get going, I know we just come back from the weekend. Let's stop over by the virtual water cooler and talk about what we've been up to. I'll tell you what I've been up to. Over the weekend, I went and saw Thoroughbreds. Have any of you guys seen Thoroughbreds?
I've not seen it. No, I've heard about it. I've heard good things. Did you like it?
It's good. It's a little slow. A little slower than I thought it was going to be, and I feel like, you know, we've kind of seen this story done before where, you know, a bunch of kids are trying to kill an adult. I mean, that's basically the plot setup of this movie, and this I don't think is done as well as those other movies. I do very much like, what's her name, the star of this movie, or one of the stars of this movie, Olivia Cooke. She's great. But yeah, I mean, it was a solid movie pass choice. Which, by the way, I went to my local theater with my movie pass, and it's just strange watching like a line of people waiting for the machine where you connect the AMC machine where you can buy your tickets, just all with their movie pass cards out. And I'm not sure if this is like in other places other than Los Angeles, but it already feels to me like everybody is going to the movie theater with their movie pass cards. So it's really strange. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is I binge watched with my girlfriend the season 3 of the Netflix series Love. Have any of you guys seen Love?
Nope.
No love for Love. Okay. Love is a great show. If you guys haven't been watching it, you should be. Paul Rust. I'm surprised Brad is not a fan of this series, because it's you know, a delightful comedy. It's set in LA, and I know a lot of people like to parody LA and kind of like there's a lot of LA movies out there, but I feel like this show gets LA right in so many ways that other, you know, movies and TV shows don't. Usually, like, the parody is a little bit too much, I feel like, in those kind of like in other movies and TV shows. But this is just perfect, and you know, it's a relationship drama comedy. The characters in it are so relatable. Just like, at least in my life, I know people like every single person in this show. And season 3 of Love, which is I think the final season of Love, which is kind of sad, has a subplot that involves Waterworld, the stunt show at Universal Studios Hollywood, which inspired me to actually go back to Universal Studios Hollywood and watch that for the 20th time. Such a great show. Both the series Love on Netflix and the Universal Waterworld stunt show at Universal Hollywood. But yeah, I would highly recommend Love, probably way more than Thoroughbreds. If you have not started watching Love, it's just so great. Let's move on. Brad, you haven't been up to anything, so let's talk to Ben. Ben, what have you been up to?
I recently finished reading Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I've never seen the Hulu show, and I, you know, have been hearing the show get this tremendous praise, and I'm one of those people that tends to want to read the book before I dive into a movie or TV adaptation. So now that my wife and I have both read The Handmaid's Tale, I think that means that getting a Hulu subscription is in our near future, just so we can check out the show now. But I was a big fan of the book. I mean, I've never read any of Atwood's novels or collections or of any sort, and so this was my introduction to her as a writer, and I thought she did a terrific job in this book. It's so it's written almost as if it's like a Diary of Anne Frank kind of thing. It's very personal and like experiential from the point of view of this one character who's played by Elizabeth Moss in the show, and yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to that book and recommend it for anybody who might be on the fence, or even if you've seen the show and enjoyed it, I would recommend diving into the book because it's really, really great.
I'm interested to hear what you are going to think of the series after reading the book, because a lot of people I've talked to have watched the series and then read the book. So yeah, I feel like yours is a different experience than most people I know. Chris, you've also been reading stuff lately. What have you been reading?
I just recently finished a book called The Big Picture. It's by Ben Fritz, and I wrote about it on /film.com. But it's a very I don't want to say depressing, but it's a little disheartening book about just where Hollywood is now and how Hollywood got to this point here in the 21st century, where studios are pretty much only concerned with making big franchise films, and mid-budget dramas for adults are pretty much a dying breed. But it's a very insightful book. It's a very quick read. I finished it pretty much in like a weekend. It's so like if you're just interested in movies and just movie making and the movie business, this is a very it's a must read. I really liked it. Like I said, it's a little depressing because it basically reveals just why there's pretty much nothing but superhero movies now, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you want more variety in your films, this explains why we're unlikely to get that anytime soon.
Is there anything surprising that you learned while reading this book? Because I know, obviously covering the news beat on /film.com on a daily basis, you're pretty in the thick of things. But was there any insight that Ben Fritz gave that was just not something you expected?
Well, this is the book that we reported on this a while ago, that news where Sony came very close to having pretty much the MCU as we know it now, and they turned it down because they only wanted Spider-Man, so we already knew about that. But there's a somewhat amusing chapter in the book about the Will Smith movie After Earth, where Will Smith had this very lofty idea for the film where he didn't want to just turn it into a movie, he wanted to turn it into also an animated series and also a video game and a theme park and comic books and even a cologne. There was supposed to be an After Earth cologne that Will Smith wanted to make. And then obviously, the film did not do well at the box office, so none of that stuff happened. So it's the whole book is just filled with interesting sort of trivia like that about, behind the scenes stuff about how, producers got a lot of stuff wrong. There's a lot about Sony in the book because one of the sources Ben Fritz uses is, the infamous Sony hacks where hackers released all these interior Sony emails online. So he pulls a lot from that. So there's a lot of stuff about just how Sony has been struggling to keep up with, like Disney and Marvel and all that stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like a good book. I know, I subscribe to Audible, and it's not an audiobook yet. I just don't have the time to, sit down and read. I just don't feel like I have the time. But I have more time, I'm walking places and stuff. So I'm hoping that at one point this is going to become an audiobook. But if not, I might have to just buy it for my Kindle and force myself down to read. Guys, I subscribe to so many comic books on my iPad, and I'm behind, I think 4 months worth of 5 series of comic books, and I'm getting charged each month, and I can't even find the time to read those. So I applaud you guys for sitting down and reading, because I just can't find the time with so much in peak TV and the Oscar season that we just got done with. But let's jump into the news. Let's start off with Star Wars. Michael K. Williams was originally supposed to star in Solo, a Star Wars story. We know that his character was kind of replaced by Paul Bettany, I think, and because of the reshoots, we now have some info on his original character. Chris, you wrote it up for the site. What do we know?
Yeah, so Michael K. Williams, like you said, he was originally going to be in Solo, and he had shot a bunch of stuff, and then Ron Howard came in to do all these reshoots. And Michael K. Williams' schedule didn't allow him to be part of the reshoot. So Paul Bettany is playing his character now. But during this recent interview, Michael K. Williams revealed some details that will likely still be in place for Bettany's take on the character. We had known for a while now that the character is going to be enhanced with CGI. Basically, it's not a human character. And according to Michael K. Williams, the character is half mountain lion, half human. So picture that if you want to. And he also reveals that there's something of a love triangle going on between his character and Emilia Clarke's character and Han Solo. So again, I'm not sure if all that's going to be in the Ron Howard cut, because I'm sure a lot of stuff has changed, but that just gives you a basic idea of how that character is going to play out in the film.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like Paul Bettany is going to have the half mountain lion take, maybe because they went back to, they had to bring him back in like late into the production, or not even late into the production, after the production, to basically reinvent the role. But it's very interesting. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but we posted it on the site today. You can check it out on slashfilm.com. But there's a Star Wars story theater standee that we have a video of, like, them putting up in a theater, and it's of like the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, and it almost makes me want to like find one in a movie theater just to get a photo, because it looks like you're like sitting in the Millennium Falcon with the cast and crew of or the cast rather of a Solo Star Wars story. It would be really weird if a standee of Ron Howard was there with you, but it looks really cool. I'll link it in the show notes. Star Wars The Last Jedi comes out on VOD this week and Blu-ray shortly after, and on that release they have a feature-length documentary, a behind-the-scenes documentary called The Director and the Jedi. The first 12 minutes are online, and Brad wrote it up for the site. Brad, what do we know?
Yeah, this is a full feature-length documentary that'll be available on the home video release of The Last Jedi, but it also just had a debut in theaters with an audience at the South by Southwest Film Festival. So there are some people who have already seen it, and it sounds like this is a fascinating and revealing, extensive look behind the scenes of the making of the movie. There's tons of behind-the-scenes footage, plenty of stuff we haven't seen before, discussions with Rian Johnson, producer Ron Bergman, Kathleen Kennedy. The clip that came out has some cool behind-the-scenes footage from very early in development when they were still working on the script, and you see Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy workshopping some scenes between Mark Hamill and Daisy Ridley as Luke and Rey, and they're just doing it on the Pinewood Studios lot in the middle of like a yard that's part of one of the small, it looks like a residence that people can stay on when they're working on a production on the lot there. And it's just really cool to see this glimpse of like how it develops and how much purpose Rian Johnson has behind even like singular lines as he talks to Mark Hamill and Daisy Ridley about the work that they're putting into the script. And then there's another clip that came online shortly after the first 12 minutes did, featuring the late Carrie Fisher talking about working with Rian Johnson. That's really cool and also a little bit bittersweet. So the good news is that if you are buying The Last Jedi on digital download, which should be available late tonight, around midnight or so, then you get to watch it right away. But if you're waiting to buy the Blu-ray, then you have to wait until a little bit later this month before you see it.
Yeah, if you're not going to buy the Blu-ray or order the VOD, I'd check out this first 12 minutes of this documentary. It looks amazing. It looks like what I wanted the behind-the-scenes documentary that was on the Force Awakens Blu-ray to be, but sadly that was kind of it felt like a studio-produced featurette that was just studio length. This feels like I'm actually getting to see moments of the behind the scenes of the production, like be almost like a eye on the corner of the set of seeing things happen that you normally shouldn't be in those areas, and it's just like even moments when like they're planning something and Kathleen Kennedy drops by a room and she like notices the cameras, like you can tell that like this wasn't like moments that were set up for the camera. The camera was just there most of the time, and I just can't wait to see the whole thing. But we will link the first 12 minutes and that scene with Carrie Fisher in the show notes. You can find it on slashfilm.com. Ben, you've been writing extensively about Apple's original TV series. We've always, on the podcast, kind of joked like we don't understand what their strategy is, what they're going to do, what their plans are. At South by Southwest, I guess they have revealed a little bit of their strategy. What do we know?
Yeah, so in very basic terms, their original TV series strategy is we're not after quantity, we're after quality. And that is a quote from Eddie Q, who is the Senior Vice President of Internet Software and Services for Apple. He was speaking at a panel at South by Southwest and talking a little bit about Apple's original TV series. We learned last year that they're going to be producing really high-level original scripted programming and trying to compete with Netflix and Amazon and Hulu. And they've been quietly racking up all of these shows, but they have still yet to actually announce how they're going to unveil those to the public and make them available for people to actually watch. That information, even after this South by Southwest talk, is still under lock and key. They still have not fully announced that yet. But he did make some interesting sort of maybe hints at what they could be doing. Basically, he said he mentioned that some, quote, surprises are coming for the home viewing experience. And he also said that he thinks, quote, there's a real change coming in the marketplace. That's the end of his quote, in terms of how people get their content. So that might be a hint toward some way that Apple is thinking about sort of changing up the game in terms of distribution. But yeah, in this article, I've run down a list of all of the Apple shows that are currently in development. They have a pretty good number of them with a lot of high-profile people: Damien Chazelle, Francis Lawrence, Octavia Spencer, Kristen Wiig, M. Night Shyamalan, and I think Steven Spielberg is still associated with the reboot of Amazing Stories. So, I mean, there's definitely some big names at play over in the Apple world. In terms of some of the other highlights of this conversation, somebody asked if Apple was considering buying Disney or Netflix. And it seems like, just on the face of it, that may seem like a ludicrous statement or question, but Apple actually is one of the few companies that has enough cash on hand to buy out a huge company like a Disney or a Netflix. And interestingly, Q said, generally, the history of Apple, we haven't made huge acquisitions. So it doesn't really officially deny that that's something that they're thinking about, but it does seem to sort of throw some water on that notion. The idea of them buying Netflix or Disney would make a lot of sense in terms of having the infrastructure in place to actually distribute the content that they're racking up right now. But yeah, it seems like they're really not interested in that. When asked about Netflix's expensive spending habits, because Netflix is spending $8 billion a year on content, Eddie Q mentioned that he said, we're making big investments. Money isn't an issue for Apple. And Apple right now, just for the record, is only slated to be spending about $1 billion a year in original programming content. So, yeah. That's sort of the latest. It's basically just, I mean, the idea of like saying, oh yeah, we're about quantity, we're not about quantity, we're about quality, seems sort of like a cliche, but it really, from the outside looking in and paying attention to what Apple's been doing, it really seems like that's something that they are taking to heart. That's not just a something that they're loosely throwing around. I think he also mentioned, he sort of compared Apple's approach to how Pixar really takes its time making sure every aspect of their movies are, carefully considered before they just hurriedly throw something out there.
Yeah, but part of me sees that, these list of shows and these people that they are getting themselves involved with, and I totally understand what he's saying. On the other hand, I look at, the first two original series that they've produced, one of being Carpool Karaoke and the other being, a reality series with Jessica Alba. And I'm wondering, really? Quality over quantity? But, okay. We'll have to see. We'll have to see where that goes. Last week we had this on the schedule. We just didn't have the time to cover it, but I wanted to talk about it today, and that is His Dark Materials is getting an adaptation coming from Tom Hooper and starring an actress from Logan. Chris, you wrote this up for today. What do we know?
Yeah, so the BBC is turning Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials books, there's 3 of them, into an 8-part series. And Tom Hooper, who directed like Les Miserables and The King's Speech, he's helming it. And Daphne Keane, who played Laura in Logan, is going to star in the film. And also Lin-Manuel Miranda from Hamilton is also in talks to star. So that's going to be a big big production for BBC. His Dark Materials previously got turned into one film in 2007. That was The Golden Compass. And that was back when studios were, greenlighting literally every YA adaptation possible to, compete with Harry Potter. But that first film did not do well at the box office, so it pretty much killed any chance of that film franchise continuing. So now it's getting another chance thanks to the BBC.
Interesting. Is this something that you might want to watch?
I confess I've never read the book, so I'm not 100% sure of it, and I'm also not a big Tom Hooper fan, but I might give it a chance depending on how it turns out. I mean, it seems definitely better suited for an adaptation like this than a film because, the books are apparently, they have a lot of stuff in them, so cramming it all into a movie probably wouldn't work out so well. So I'll give it a chance, but right now I'm a little hesitant.
Yes. And South by Southwest, the film festival is in full effect. Ready Player One, the new Steven Spielberg film, debuted last night to some problems. But we now have the early buzz on if this film is actually good. Brad, is Ready Player One a good movie?
It sounds like the majority of the critics who were on hand for the premiere of Ready Player One at South by Southwest did indeed enjoy it, perhaps even more than they anticipated. The movie has kind of been getting some shade thrown at it recently. Apparently those homage posters that were released a little while ago didn't please as many people as they might have thought. A lot of people thought they looked stupid. A lot of people think that the nostalgia that's tied into this movie because of all the pop culture mashups within the world of the Oasis feels artificial and hollow. And a lot of that influence also comes from the reception that the book has gotten from certain people who have read it. But it sounds like Steven Spielberg may have worked some of his magic on the movie and perhaps improved upon some of the book's shortcomings because a lot of the reactions have been praising it left and right. Our Meredith Borders is someone who's at the film festival who's been doing some reviewing for us while she's down there, and she said that it's full of giant dorky heart. She both wants to hug it and give it a noogie. And a bunch of other people are saying that they love it, that it's extremely geeky. Obviously, it's full of a bunch of references. It's the kind of Spielberg movie that we haven't really seen in a while because even though Spielberg has churned out some great stuff like The Post and Lincoln and whatnot, he hasn't made a big, spectacle blockbuster like this in some time. So it's a bit of a return to form for him. Apparently he said before the thing, he's like, we didn't go into this making a film. We wanted to make a movie. And and
he also said that some movies he makes as a director of film and some movies he makes from the point of view of the audience. And this is a movie he made from the audience.
Right, exactly. So it's not all good news, though. There were some people who didn't like it.
Predominantly women critics, which is interesting.
Yeah, some of the female critics who were on hand didn't seem to be too pleased with it. And a lot of it is tied to some of the things that we said before with regards to the fake nostalgia and it feeling kind of shallow. So, it might be one of those things where your mileage may vary. We'll see if it appeals to, a wider audience as it gets closer. As we found out before, it's not tracking too well. When we first heard about the potential box office for its opening weekend, it was only tracking at 35 million, which seems kind of disappointing for a movie on this scale from Steven Spielberg. But then again, you have to remember this is a movie that doesn't have a huge movie star in it, and it also isn't really one of the most recognized pieces of intellectual property. Ready Player One has a lot of fans in the geek community, but it's not anything on the scale of like a Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. So even though it's a popular book, it's not necessarily like you're adapting one of the most well-known pieces of literature, to come out in recent years.
Yeah, and it should also be mentioned that, at a film festival when you're seeing a movie, there is kind of more enthusiasm, especially, Steven Spielberg and the cast and crew were in the house. So I'm not saying that, take these bits of early buzz, lightly, but we'll see when the first actual reviews outside of film festivals come and see if they line up with this.
It should also be said, too, that there was just as much excitement, even though the screening did have to be stopped twice due to an audio issue during a huge climactic moment, apparently towards the end of the film. So the fact that audiences were not super annoyed, and it didn't affect how they felt about the movie. I think that kind of speaks to it being hopefully being something that we'll all enjoy when it comes out later this month.
Yeah, I was reading on Twitter they had to restart the film, or that battle, twice, and the sound just kept on going out. The second time they did it and the sound went out, the audience just started making all the sound effects and making up lines, and then they stopped again and got it going. But I just thought that was amazing. I mean, if I was in the theater, maybe it wouldn't be amazing, but amazing to hear from afar. And we have one last and final segment, and that is the spoiler room. We're going to do something for Star Wars Rebels, the series finale. So if you have not seen that or care to see it, you might want to tune out now. And that includes our own Brad Oman, who has yet to catch up on Rebels. So Brad, I'll let you go here. Well, thank you, Brad.
All right, see ya.
Okay, let's get into the spoiler room. So if you have not seen the series finale of Star Wars Rebels, and you have any interest in the series finale of Star Wars Rebels, we were about to spoil, something that happens in the last minute of that series finale. But basically, Star Wars Rebels creator Dave Filoni has come out saying he has a plan for a new character introduced in the finale, in that last minute of the finale. Chris, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Yeah, so plan is it's a nice word. He says he hasn't given it too much thought, but he has a vague idea of the future of that character. The character's name is Jason Syndulla. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
yeah, and I can introduce who he is.
Yes, please, Peter, help me out, because I have never seen this show, and I don't know what any of this means.
Okay, Hera is his mother. She's one of the main characters of the Ghost Crew that Star Wars Rebels follows, and her father was Kanan, one of the last known Jedis in the universe, or in the galaxy, rather. And Kanan died, and it was revealed in the coda for the finale that basically Hera and Kanan had a kid, that she was pregnant before he died, and they had a kid named Jason, which is a throwback line to Han Solo and Leia's kid from the original expanded universe. But anyways, so this kid is just kind of mentioned, we see him for 5 seconds in the show. The show ends on kind of this big cliffhanger that everybody's talking about. Everybody thinks the cliffhanger is kind of like the next TV series and where the next animated series is going to go. But a lot of people haven't been concentrated on this one moment, this introduction of this kid. So I don't know. It's just interesting that Dave Filoni. So you're saying that he doesn't have a serious plan for this.
Yes, he literally says, I have not given a lot of thought to where that goes. But he also says, he named the character, of course, to reference, like you said, the Han Solo and Leia's son from the book series, which it is of course different than the film series. But so yeah, there's not 100% plan, but there are people who are now theorizing that maybe that character grows up to be part of the Knights of Ren from the ongoing film series, because we haven't really gotten a lot of detail on them yet as characters. So that's just one theory that's floating around right now.
And that's interesting too, because the end of this series it's flash forward to after Return of the Jedi. And this is a timeline where Luke Skywalker would be starting up his Jedi Academy. So I wanted to pose this to you, Ben. You're hearing all this for the first time. At this point, we thought all the Jedi were gone from the galaxy. There's this new kid who's a Jedi, or has the genes of his father. Not that I guess Last Jedi has proven that anybody could be a Jedi, but forget that for a moment. Do you think an animated series filling in the gaps of what happened at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Training Academy and the birth of the Knights of Ren and all that stuff might be a good way of not having to explain that in the big movies?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yes. Because I personally, as somebody who is not invested in this part of the Star Wars mythos, would really be almost annoyed if they basically brought whatever narrative they were doing in the films to a halt, or God forbid, slotted in another like in-between-quel, kind of prequel movie with a young Luke Skywalker or a younger Luke Skywalker. Actually, that was something Mark Hamill was just talking about. Like, I think we wrote about that on the site too, so maybe we can link to that in the show notes as well. But he was mentioning like, oh, he would like Sebastian Stan to maybe play a young version of him if such a thing ever came to be, or if they went really, really young, they could be like Jacob Tremblay from Room. And that idea just sounded so terrible to me. But the notion of another animated series that does fill in those gaps sounds perfect. I mean, that's like exactly what these things are. These animated shows have done so well, at least from the outside looking in, is done so well thus far, is really like fleshing out these time periods that are sort of a mystery in the Star Wars lore, and making them engaging and providing brand new characters that people really love to attach themselves to. So the idea of and also like the setting of a Jedi Academy sounds like tailor-made for Adventures of the Week kind of thing. I feel like there's a lot of potential there. Is that something you would be interested in seeing, Peter, as somebody who's watched all of Rebels?
I mean, part of me says, yeah, I would love to see, what happens and how that came about. But the other part of me is like, I also wanted to see what the Clone Wars were. And then we saw what the Clone Wars were, and it really wasn't that exciting. And, we kind of see the key moment where Kylo Ren kind of turns his back on Luke Skywalker. Like, is it really interesting to see, the build up to that, and to see the Knights of Ren and what goes on? That, like, Chris is... Now that this theoretical idea, we don't even know that this is true. This is like just a theory in, the eye of ScreenRant.com. If this were the case, if this was the pitch for the new animated series on the Disney streaming service, now that it's connected to the new Star Wars films, would that be enough to pull you in?
I really don't know. I love the Star Wars movies. I've just never felt an urge to watch, like Rebels or any of the outlier things. I mean, I'll say no. I'm gonna just take a firm stance. I'm gonna be not diplomatic for once, and I'm gonna say no. I will not watch it. So no.
Interesting. Ben, I know you are very skeptical, and I mean, you only want to see the Handmaid's Tale now, after you've read the book and heard all the acclaim. Like, it took you all that to get to it. Right. I'm assuming that you have no interest in this.
Yeah, I mean, because I would feel like I would need to watch... I would feel like I would need to fill in all of the gaps leading up to it properly. So that would, for me, probably involve watching all of Rebels, because I have to imagine that there would be more of a connection there, and more callbacks and stuff. And I just don't, I wouldn't want to miss out on anything if I really decided to dive into something like that. So yeah, I probably wouldn't watch it, but I do like the idea of it being out there for the people who are like looking for ways to immerse themselves in more Star Wars mythos. And obviously, in all of the movies and in all things Star Wars, I would prefer it. My across the board preference would be for them to explore new things and go in new directions that we have not seen before. But if, there's not as much, I was going to say there's not as much profit in that, but let me frame it another way. Hollywood is traditionally risk averse, and that means tapping into familiar elements, right? So, from a business perspective, I could understand why they would say, okay, let's keep it contained to things that people have at least some idea about, instead of going off and doing brand new things like they're doing with these new movie trilogies and movie series that they have planned. So I'm hoping that those projects are successful enough to convince Disney to continue to expand that universe out, instead of returning and shrinking back in a little bit.
Okay, it sounds like you haven't read it, but it sounds like you've read the big picture. But let's bring this podcast to the end now. I will link to all these stories in the show notes. You can find this podcast /Film Daily on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Please send us your comments, concerns, questions to peter@slashfilm.com. Leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention it on the air. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Spread the word. Tell your friends, and we'll see you tomorrow.